Ooh, 38 in Mill Creek. Okay, that wins. Arizona's still warmer.
Okay, so Brooke, I just hit record on this since we're at 11.
Okay, great. My name is Brooke George. I am a teacher at Robert Eagle Staff Middle School. I teach 8th grade U.S. history and one section of ethnic studies. And this is our wonderful librarian at Robert Eagle Staff Middle School and my friend and a mentor, Rebecca Wynkoop, and she's going to be talking to us today about blended learning. So I will stop talking so we can get on the road. But just one thing, please have your microphones muted and be mindful of your background distractions. Use the chat in Zoom or raised hands for questions, and you can keep the chat on topic. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am going to go ahead and navigate towards where I'd like to be today. And I will tell you that we have moved in Seattle to Teams. And so while we did originally start in Zoom last spring, being back in this particular environment makes I'm a little anxious and a little nervous that we're not getting to where we need to go. I do have myself pulled up. I'm a little concerned you are not yet seeing what I am wanting you to see. Hang on just a second. Brooke, are you able to see the presentation? Or are you still staring at my documents?
We can just see your documents.
Oh, for crying out loud. Hang on just a second.
There it goes.
There we go. Awesome. And I would love to have you all start by just following this link and choosing the gift that maybe, let's start with how you're feeling right now. Just want to kind of do a quick temperature check and see how folks are feeling. I will also drop this in the chat for you. Oops, sorry. You can also scan that QR code if you'd like. There we go. Oh. I mentioned earlier that we had plans a long time ago. I'm on the road. I'm in Arizona. I am not like in the safety and comfort of my very own home. So things like turning off the air conditioning so that it doesn't make too much noise is where we're working with today. So thank you for coming. I really that we are able today to share a little bit about the journey I've been on as a librarian in Seattle Public Schools with regard to blended learning and the work that we are doing together. And I will start today with a very brief introduction of myself. I am Rebecca Wynkoop. I am the librarian at Robert Eagle Staff Middle School. I have the joy of working with Brooke George, who's our host today. And a lot of what I'll be talking about today is a journey that Brooke and I have partnered on, certainly in the last year and a half or so, and something that we're continuing to work with. Our mantra for today is brave before perfect. Thank you for allowing me to be here in this space. I'm feeling brave, knowing I'm in a room of social studies teachers. And for the large majority of my career, I have been a teacher librarian. You can follow my professional work at Eagle Staff LIB for library on both Twitter and Instagram if you would like a little bit of my background. I studied history at the University of Washington, and I got my master's in library and information science from the iSchool at the UW as well. And then was fortunate enough to continue to start my work at the Bush School in the library there while they then paid for my teaching certification in social studies through Western Washington University. I've been at Eckstein Middle School, Daniel Bagley Elementary School, and I'm in my 4th year. at Eagle Staff Middle School. We are a relatively new school in Seattle, and I had the joy of being on the planning and the building leadership team that helped design and launch the start of that particular school. Today, we will be talking a lot about Catlin Tucker's book, Blended Learning in Action, a practical guide toward sustainable change. And I think that Catlin and her book, Blended Learning, are really a foundation for the work that we have started in Seattle Public Schools. I'll talk a little bit about what we've done at Eagle Staff. I'm also going to talk to you about what my role has been as a librarian, both in my building and in the district. And one of the things I want to come back to is that the collaborative nature for a social studies teacher and potentially a librarian in your school. Hopefully you have. I know that's not the case in many instances. Go ahead and pause for a minute to make sure we're all muted. Thank you. The work in Seattle started with a digital learning specialist group that I was fortunate to be a part of, and it was started by librarians. And it was intended to take a look at this and really truly shifting pedagogy and increasing student agency. The three core foundations of blended learning are really providing pace, place, and choice for students as they engage in whatever coursework or content we're providing them access to. And racial equity has been a primary driver for this. And the group that helped start this, we call ourselves the DLLAs, the Digital Library Learning Ambassadors. So that may show up as we move forward. With equity as our driver, when we think about the work that we're doing in our social studies classrooms and in our partnerships with our librarians, relevant pedagogy, strong relationships, and blended learning are the accelerators. There's basically, we recognize that to attain this, we have to rely on the accelerators in order to allow these tools and strategies to actually help us accomplish our goal. And so there's basically a three-step process, right? Your individual practice, your school practice, that includes staff and administration. I'll talk a little bit about how we've begun to try and shift the way in which even our administration engages in professional learning with teachers in the building and in district practice as well. How
Animal person.
at a district level.
Looks like he threw it around the White House.
Awesome. The purpose behind our work, again, looking at that collaborative nature, it may be just within your department. You may be looking cross department. Maybe a social studies department is looking at building some blended learning practices that are cross-disciplinary and move into other regions of a student's day. But we really, truly must develop our own strong practices. And in order to do that, taking the time to not only think about what we're doing and why we're doing it, but working together is really important. The collaborative partnership piece that I just wanted to point out to you, I wanted to make sure you understood that for me and for librarians, that the work that we do in supporting the work you all are doing in classrooms really requires that we are dipping our toes in a lot of different pots in order to try and make sure that the thread of blended learning is consistent throughout all of those. So in Seattle, we started as 12 librarians across the district. They're mostly K-12 and full-time librarians, and we met once a month, an hour for teams. And so thinking about how you might launch or shift the culture in your building to embrace blended learning, thinking about what structures already exist in your schools that could help support the work that you would be doing in blended learning, and building a team. It may be as small as you and your grade level partner. It could be a little bit larger and be a department. It could be a PLC that might be cross-disciplinary. And so there's lots of ways that you can think about what's going to be the best support system for you as you engage in what really is a shift, a complete shift in how we view the student's role in their learning. And in Seattle, we're fortunate enough to have a shared learning management system. I'm not going to dive into which one's better and which one works, but the important piece is that we had a way to share our practice And for us, Schoology, that's the learning management system we're using, allowed us to work collaboratively to share lessons and to look at each other's practice in a way that we wouldn't have been able to without it. It did, you know, as fate would have it, the work we started doing in order to meet, we were meeting across the district initially, and that gave us an opportunity to start to use almost 2 years ago, some of the video conferencing software we're using now for our teaching. And so it gave us a little bit of a leg up, but again, embracing brave before perfect and really recognizing that with students at the center of this work, it's okay. It's okay if we struggle. It's okay if we try it again. We did set a scope and sequence. We started a blended learning PLC at Eagle Staff. Brooke, George and I worked last year in that blended learning PLC. And then also just continuing to open our classrooms to each other and making sure that not just our admin has an opportunity to see the work that we're doing, but that our colleagues are sharing in that work as well. This was the original scope and sequence that we set up for ourselves. And here's basically what's going to guide the presentation today. I'm going to give you a look at station rotation, playlist, flipped classroom, and tic-tac-toe boards. I'm not going to dive too heavily into student-led stations. As I thought about kind of the current environment and where our schools are right now, I wanted to really touch upon the things that I think are most adaptable or amenable to either an in-person, hybrid, or a 100% remote model, and really give you just some seeds for thinking about how this might work in whatever environment you might be in currently. We did start this rotation, and I was fortunate enough to begin working on this with other librarians before I took it to what was our 8th grade social studies team and our ELL team last year for our PLC work. And so the intent is to continue to do things over and over again. And again, with students at the center of that, their pace, place, and choice. And that student agency was really what we were hoping to harness. So blended learning in our current environment, some of the questions that we have is, how do we use pace, place, and choice in asynchronous and synchronous settings? How do we deliberately plan online and offline activities? And how do we serve students furthest from educational justice? And so I'm going to pause there and just see if there were any questions. Brooke, are we doing okay on the chat?
Yes, we're okay on the chat.
Okay, I feel like I'm flying right now. So please feel free to slow things down. If you have any questions or clarifications, Brooke's going to monitor the chat for me, and we'll go ahead and do that. So the first piece that I wanted to make sure I touch base with you, the book that I'm talking about, I am talking about a specific text. And sometimes it feels a little strange to think about a shift in practice based solely upon one book. But the thing that is so amazing about this particular book is not only does Catlin Tucker provide the language and the guidance for how to shift practice in your own teaching, but also in more of a systemic way within your building. But then it's not just about telling you what a station rotation is and then leaving you alone to figure out how to do that. But literally in the book, she goes through and she shows you different options. You know, I could run an entire, hour-long session on station rotations, and it would just be a start. And so today is intended really to give you a few ideas that I'm aware of and have either worked on or worked with colleagues on, and let you see and think about how these strategies in blended learning could change the way in which we ask students to engage in the learning that they are doing. And in station rotation, the first question really truly is, how do you use pace, place, and choice? So again, pace, how quickly a student moves through whatever the task or the content is that they're being asked to engage in. Place, when we're in the classroom, the idea of place is a little bit more concrete when they're already at home and they maybe don't have a lot of choice for where they're going to engage in their learning. It might be a little different. In the classroom, when we think about place, We think about what's the task that we're asking them to do, what's the work we're asking them to do, and then how can our classroom environment actually, the physical furniture and the arrangements of the classroom actually help to facilitate the station rotation and the work that they're doing. And then choice. Choice is in how much agency are we allowing students to have when they're in our classrooms. So this is an example from Liz Krause. She happens to be a librarian at Nathan Hale High School. And I share this example because in its simplest form, this is one way in which station rotation can begin to empower students to really engage in their learning, but also it's not a replacement for teaching. It's not a replacement for the teacher being a part of that. So the first one, the first station rotation here, Dr. Google, this is on computers. And the question is, health misinformation threatens lives. Who's responsible for fixing it? And there's some New York Times articles that students would read independently and participate in an online discussion, facilitated through a learning management system or a Padlet or whatever tool you might choose to use. The second station in this rotation is conspiracy theories, right? This is a TV screen and they watch a short video and discuss with the group that they're with. And the third is fact checking. And you notice here that her name, Ms. Krause, is here. And the question is, how can we verify questionable information? And this is the check, right? This is the assessment piece. This is that check for understanding that we want to make sure we've given students the information, we ask them to engage with it in a certain way. And how do we then assess that what we've given them and what our learning targets were, how do we know that we're there? And so that teacher check-in is really important in a station rotation. There are a couple of key elements to consider with a station rotation. Now, in the last example, there was one on a computer, there was one on a TV screen, and then there was one in person with the classroom teacher. And in a station rotation, you could have up to, as many stations as you wanted, quite frankly. You could have 15, you could have 3, depending upon the content you want students to engage with and what you'd like them to be able to do. The idea here is that initially, in a classroom setting, when we're face-to-face and in person, that we move further and further away from the sit and get, from the lecture at the front of the room, from the read the book and answer the question kind of education that most of us have grown up with. And quite frankly, still a large majority of teachers are teaching in that way because that's how we were told to teach. That's how we went through our teaching preparation programs. But in a station rotation, in a blended learning model, we really create spaces for learning in different ways to engage in either different or even the same information. And when you're in person, you really want to limit the tech time. The idea behind station rotation was initially created to let students get up and move, to have them work in different groups, to have them actually puzzle, sometimes literally physically puzzling through information that's in front of them and moving things around. Maybe, it's an example of, restructuring or deciding what the electoral map might look like at the end of an election. And they're working in a small group to try and put those pieces together and add the information that they maybe gained from an article they read in a different station that might help them make the choices about which states might choose which candidates. For example, so in a station rotation, when you're in person, you really want to try and make sure you're spacing your offline and your online activities. You try never to put 2 in a row. A teacher-led station is a really great way. In the background here, you can see this is a picture of one of our language arts teachers in the library. We were in the middle of doing station rotations and she was doing readers conferences with students. That was our offline and teacher-led station for the day. Collaborative opportunities for students in smaller groups is always great. I know, again, a lot of these things you will say, well, I already do that. Why is this any different? And you're right, some of it isn't a lot different, but what comes from this is really the intent and the purpose behind blended learning. And again, coming back to that student agency and pace, place, and choice. So rather than creating groups, because group work facilitates conversation, we are really giving students opportunities to choose where they work best. With a station rotation, you can have students move lockstep in an order, or you might have them moving in a self-directed manner. In the time for station rotations will be dependent upon what you choose. In my library, when I'm working collaboratively with a classroom teacher and we're trying to get through station rotations in 50 minutes, we're looking at much shorter stations as far as time is concerned. So we might change what's happening in those stations based upon the amount of time that we have. I know that Brooke, in her classroom, when they were looking at station rotations, they were looking at maybe a week worth of rotating through stations, or even 2 weeks of rotating through stations, so that students had the amount of time that they needed in order to get through the content or the activity that was designed for that station. So that's one of the benefits to the station model, is that there's no hard and fast rule for how students move through it, for how long it should take them. And again, that gets back to the pace, place, and choice that's really foundational to blended learning. Station rotation groups can be designed to facilitate learning. If you think about grouping students by skill or mastery level, if you have opportunities for students to create groups based on interest or passion, if you're allowing them to self-select, or even looking at, how would you ensure the diversity of roles for students when they're in those groups. And it is a unique opportunity to build in some opportunities for enrichment. Sometimes you have that one student who might not be good at accessing information in a digital format, so they might choose the offline print resources more frequently. You might have the opposite be true. And in addition, for our students that move very fast, who are learning at a faster pace, it allows you to build in additional opportunities for them to go deeper into their learning. Just one thing to consider when you plan is little teeny tiny thing. What's your auditory signal? Like how visual and auditory signal for how you're going to move students from station to station. We do find that if they get really excited about something they're in, they want to stay there and focus and finish that. That might be something you can do, but also like thinking just, really quickly about what can they come to rely on in a station rotation model. We found over time that as students did station rotations, we found more confidence, a higher level of understanding. And this is just one of the first surveys we did with students. And we asked them quite simply, do station rotations help you learn? And you can see here that the large majority of students said yes. But some of the questions also gave us pause as teachers, as educators, to think about what instructions were we giving? What do we need to adjust as far as time? How do we help with transitions? Things like that. I'll pause for just a second and see if there are any questions on station rotation.
Yes. So, sorry, I'm hearing some reverb.
No problem.
Basically saying, well, how do we institute something like this during this time of like remote learning?
Yeah,
Or even if you are in a classroom social distancing?
for sure. I think that the thing that we lose control of in a hybrid or an in-person model in the age of COVID is we lose the ability to limit our offline versus online. It's a lot harder if you have a student that's home and 100% remote. It's a lot harder to build offline activities and thinking about how they might engage with information in that way. The thing that I think is unique about blended learning is blended learning was initially created to provide opportunities for students to engage with technology in a way that was meaningful and developmentally appropriate. And so in thinking about, I'll go through one scenario. If you're in a 100% remote model and you're looking at how do I create station rotations, you might use your asynchronous time. In Seattle, we have synchronous in class together time. We have asynchronous time. In addition, when you're creating a station rotation, you have your offline and your online activities. That offline activity might be, using a Flipgrid to record your response to a prompt based upon maybe information that was shared either in your synchronous time or through a video. it does make it a little harder to work with groups. I know in Seattle, we have been struggling a little with breakout rooms and teams. We found some workarounds, but using breakout rooms is a great way to facilitate that rotation model. And then using your LMS to kind of guide that. Even if you're face-to-face, it would be really interesting to think about, could students work with social distancing? Could they work with a group using a video conferencing tool that would allow them to be together, even if they couldn't be next to each other? And so I don't know that there's any hard and fast ways to answer that question directly, but I think the most important thing is that one, technology initially this was about a limited amount of technology that students would have access to, and how could we get them to that, but also not overloading students. And so now that we have an overwhelming amount or an abundance of technology in the work we're doing, it's also about kind of paring that down and thinking about how the choices we give students allow them to navigate through that. And the truth of the matter is, you could do a station rotation. A student could do it individually. We all have students in our classes that work better on their own. And if at that moment, the learning target is about the content and not about that student's social and emotional goals potentially, then it's okay to allow them to access that content individually.
I think that's as far as questions go, unless I'm sorry.
Okay.
Somebody did ask about this. This is kind of focused at the secondary level. How would that look in an elementary or K-3 setting with technology?
Yeah, and I think as we move forward, I'm going to show you a couple of other options as far as kind of these, we talked about the scope and sequence as you're moving through blended learning strategies. And I think that as we move forward, you'll see and start to begin to see how you could maybe adapt some of these things to an elementary level. You're right, this is primarily secondary at this point. I was at Daniel Begley Elementary for 5 years, so I have a little window right into the hearts and minds of our elementary teachers. And so I'll make sure that I definitely touch base on that as we move forward. And quite frankly, the choice board is a really great example of one way in which you could adapt this for a younger student. Or quite frankly, the truth of the matter is our synchronous and asynchronous, our 100% remote model puts a large burden to read and navigate on our students. And so a choice board can be used to help minimize text and help provide an easier access point for students. We have some librarians in Seattle who are doing some great things at the elementary level with either like a Google Classroom page or even using a choice board to help students move their way through. This example here is a choice board I used with one of our language arts teachers as we were preparing students to go see a play on Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And we wanted students to begin to just explore the world that she was living in and the impact that she had had in not only in music, but socially in the United States at the time. And choice boards are a really great way to kind of like begin to think about tic-tac-toe. I'm going to show you tic-tac-toe as well, but this is kind of an example of the way in which students were allowed to use choice boards. They had basically nine things they could engage in. We start by saying, make sure you can get a tic-tac-toe. You want 3 in a row. You can go across, down, or diagonal. And then we wanted to then make sure that students have the space to do this kind of work. And so the choice board really allows a student to focus on guided exploration, to provide opportunities for students to decide what learning is meaningful to them. In this particular instance, we had a lot of students who were really listening to Sister Rosetta Tharpe's music and then digging deeper into the lyrics and thinking about what impact they had on society at the time that she was alive, to immerse students in the content. The idea too behind a choice board is what can you provide multimodally for students to engage in the content. So it could be listening to songs, it could be a read aloud, for example, that's recorded. It could be an article that they're reading. You can think about the tools that students at any grade level are already using in their classrooms, and how can you use those as well here. A choice board, online or offline, You know, a choice board could be as simple as one of the things you do is have a conversation with an adult or another person in your house about something that's happening in the world, and then they're going to apply that to whatever learning you're doing in class at the time. And choice boards can be done individually or in groups. You could have choice boards and you could then send those students off into a breakout room and they could be working through that choice board together, or it can be done individually. The tic-tac-toe board is kind of like your choice board on steroids. And the idea behind a tic-tac-toe board is that this is where really intense differentiation comes in, where a teacher is maybe guiding a student more through that learning based upon their knowledge of the student. And this is from a secondary science classroom at Ballard High School. And the idea here is really focusing on how do we give students information, ask them to digest that and struggle with that, and then provide some sort of final product. And you can see that final products in this particular instance range from notes in your notebook to a clear illustration with labels, to a Schoology post, to edits and adjustments made in an actual, your more traditional paper or essay. So lots of different ways to do this. This particular teacher likes to work from a 3+me model. In this tic-tac-toe board, maybe it's not necessarily about 3 in a row or up and down or diagonal, but choosing 3 on the board, and then you're making sure you're checking in with the teacher. So the 3+me is something that this teacher has moved to as well. You can also, as you build a tic-tac-toe board, when we talk about differentiation, when we talk about meeting maybe the needs of our students who are learning English, or our students who are receiving special education services, you design the tic-tac-toe board to move in a fashion that is intended to guide the student. And so you might say, for example, to a student that is learning English as a second language and needs an additional support as far as digesting text, you might say, hey, Samir, you're going to be using the first column, move 1, 2, and 3 down the first column, and then check in with me, and just giving them kind of guidance in how they move through that. And then in addition, again, as we think about the opposite end of the spectrum, where we see some students who want that acceleration, looking at how many of these can you get through in order to get to that time and understanding of the tic-tac-toe boards. I'll pause there for just a minute.
I don't have any questions in the chat, but if anybody has any questions they would like to ask.
I will say too, while we pause, Catlin Tucker, again, who's written this book that has guided certainly my practice in blended learning. If you look for, she has a blog online, there's tons of resources there as well. In addition, as far as, how would you set up station rotation? She has also begun to adapt her original work to a 100% and a hybrid model. So there's lots of opportunities to look and see more closely how she suggests doing this work. And it's been really great. She's been incredibly responsive to the shifts in our lives as educators. And being a teacher herself, she has seen and done and practiced this. This is coming from nowhere, but in a classroom, and really helpful to see that. The next item I want to talk about, and just kind of being cognizant of time, I don't want to run out of time for sure, is a playlist. And a playlist is just what it sounds like. You think about a playlist in iTunes or what have you, and it's really a selection that students can work their way through. It's likely all digital content. It's a really great way to increase student agency and to allow students to personalize their learning. Students can pace according to readiness as well. So the example I have here, this is a playlist that I have. It's a very simplified playlist. It doesn't include any of my checks for understanding. It doesn't include any of the ways in which students were responding to this. It's really just a list of links that take students to either a book review online, a first chapter read of whatever book it is, to the ebook or audiobook that is available to students. And at our school, we use Project Lit. pretty extensively. It's came from a group of teachers and their classrooms down in Nashville, Tennessee, where students really were demanding that the text they were reading in class better reflected their lives, and that they celebrated authors and characters of color, and that they started to rewrite the narrative of what is deemed worthy of academic study. And so we ask students to engage in these texts and really to begin to think about their windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors and how they're looking into. So we have offline and online ways in which students are responding to this. But again, you know, a student maybe is moving further through this at a quicker pace if they're a speedy reader. For example, I'm a slow reader. I'm not going to get through 6 books in a week, and some of my students can do that. One of the other things is that a playlist can ensure multimodality. And so when you're thinking about the tools that we have and that we probably use to a far greater extent than maybe we did pre-COVID, thinking about Flipgrid, thinking about small group work on an asynchronous day, thinking about a checklist. If you're using OneNote, how do you build a checklist for your playlist into OneNote? Thinking about Padlet for how can students begin to share their learning and their responses to their exploration and their understanding of whatever's being covered in a Padlet, sharing moments of inspiration. For Project Lit, we offer students an opportunity to do book reviews. We offer students an opportunity to respond with how the book was a window, a mirror, or sliding glass door for them. And for in-person classroom setup for a playlist, the playlist would be as flexible as possible for a student. And in particular, I'm thinking about the physical space. Really, again, blended learning is intended to give students as much agency in their learning as possible. It should mean when we're back together and we're allowed to resume teaching and learning in the way we understood and knew it prior to COVID, that our furniture is flexible. That maybe a student working by themselves needs to grab a small spot in the front of the classroom, while a self-selected group of students who are heading one direction might sit and huddle their chairs up. Really, truly thinking about ditching the rows and the teacher at the front of the room, and really putting the students at the center of their learning. And so playlists can be used in a lot of different ways. I know Brooke has used playlists. You know, if you're thinking about moving through something like a history of a particular time period, right? The thing I think about playlists, that we all, even as teachers, we all have those moments when there's something we're covering and we go, oh my gosh, this picture, I really want students to see this, and I want them to look really closely at. Oh my gosh, there's this song that was written in response to this thing. I want them to listen to this and read the lyrics to this. And we think about all those nuggets that we know are going to catch our students, and a playlist allows us to put those intermittently in with the more heavy content driven pieces that we might have, and really give students a chance to put the two together. And I'm only going to touch just briefly on flipped classroom. I do know there's another session, a concurrent session right now on a flipped classroom, where I'm sure they're going to go into far greater depth than I am right now about a flipped classroom. I just thought I'd give you an example of how you might set up a flipped classroom. And the flipped classroom, the idea behind a flipped classroom is actually very similar to what many of us are experiencing in a 100% remote model. If you think about a pre-video or an activity or discussion when you're together, right? The example here is, why would you use a specific database for research, or how do you pick your next book? And then you think about a video that they could then engage with asynchronously. It could be literally, describing how to write your claim, your transition sentences, and then how do you get into your next paragraph. Or it could be a video that is a documentary about whatever happens to be there. It could even be teaching a student how to use a database that allows them to stop, pause, go back, try it, maybe go back to that video over and over again as they do that, and then your post-video activity or discussion. and thinking about how we would want students to be able to do that. Again, the pace of a flipped classroom, the videos, right? Students can play, pause, and replay, and students can access information upon arrival. In a flipped classroom, the idea here is that the teacher doesn't necessarily start that, but that the students, we work with students to understand how a flipped classroom puts them in the driver's seat. And choice as far as students are concerned, students control when, where, and how frequently they consume information, and choice is embedded within the lesson. So a flipped classroom really does, require, quite frankly, all of these things require preparation beyond the lecture that you maybe have come accustomed to giving over the last, whatever years of your teaching career. It really does involve a lot of preparing the classroom environment for students and then allowing them to access that. And I think honestly that's where the shift for blended learning really comes from, is how do we as teachers remove ourselves from the delivery of that information, and we give students the opportunity to jump in and do that. And then we're there kind of at the end, right? We're like the tour guide who says, oh, here's your room on this lovely cruise, and here's how you get your food, and here's where you can engage in these activities. And then we're also there at the end to make sure that their experience was meaningful and valuable, and that what we wanted them to learn, what we wanted them to be exposed to, where that teacher-led piece of it is really there to make sure that what we've prepared did the job we wanted it to do. It could be in the form, right? Quite frankly, it could be in the form of your standard assessment, and that's fine, right? You have to have checks for understanding, but the flipped classroom, the tic-tac-toe board, the choice board, your playlist, or your station rotation allows students to jump in, and instead of sitting back and passively consuming whatever information it is we want them to consume, we ask them to interact with that and really become partners in that learning. I do want to make sure you all know that a lot of the work that I have done wasn't guided by me. I am constantly learning, and I love that I was asked to come and share this with you. I guarantee you're going to have questions beyond what I was able to present or offer you today. So I want to make sure you have my email. You're welcome to reach out to me. I would be happy to share any resources that I have as far as our scope and sequence is concerned, as far as Catlin Tucker's blog. Follow her on, she's on both Instagram and Twitter. I can put you in touch with other colleagues. Brooke is my social studies colleague at Eagle Staff, and I know she would be absolutely willing to share her experience with blended learning. And I will tell you, I've been trying to build blended learning opportunities for students in my classroom for the last 3.5 years. And I still feel like a novice. I feel like I'm still trying to figure out how to do it best. And I think that's the rub right there, because a blended learning model is dependent upon the students in your class. And every year our students change. And that means the way in which we implement blended learning in our classroom changes. You might have a class that can't do station rotation until January. Maybe you have 6th graders who need a little more structure and to understand what independent learning looks like before you launch into a station rotation, but maybe they could handle a choice board that gives them a little more structure and guidance. How much do you have to do? When do you have to do it by? We have learners, we have those concrete learners who still need that guidance. So also just a quick shout out to some of my colleagues, Susie Chambers and Kelsey Klug and Deborah Fournier and Craig Seychelles, all K-12 librarians in Seattle Public Schools, who have helped to begin to guide this work in our building and support our classroom teachers as they dive in as well. And I'm just so grateful for the partnerships that I have at Eagle Staff, and for the ability to share this with them and to allow me to be brave before perfect, because you know what? I'm never going to get there, but I'm willing to be brave. I'm willing to dive in and allow that to happen. So thank you very much for for the invitation. Thank you for your willingness to think about how we might look at our classrooms. I recognize, right, that we're probably further along in our blended learning than we were 6 months ago because we were forced to do so with regard to remote learning and how we can teach our kids through a computer. But I think it's a truly valuable venture, and I have really enjoyed sharing it with you today. I'm happy to pause and take any questions, Brooke, if there were any questions.
Lots of people expressing gratitude, and again, all of these sessions and PowerPoints will be located on the Washington State Council for Social Studies website, so you can go back and digest, because that's part of blending learning, right? Is having the ability to stop a video and rewind and watch it as many times as you want. I will say, as far as my experience with the blended learning, I've tried a little bit with remote learning, the choice board. Every time you do something, you find new things to think about and you make it a little bit better, and being brave and opening up your mind to allowing students to drive the learning really engages, especially in a remote setting. And lots of feedback from students. We did surveys with our students. That was our exit tickets a lot of times, is how was this activity for you? How can we make it better? So those are other things that I would say, is that, you know, listen to the kids, because they are the ones that are going to tell you, hey, this really was fun, or we might want to go back and think about this again. So but if you have any questions, you can always email me. I believe my email is on the Washington State Council for Social Studies website. I'm new to this, but thank you, Rebecca, for coming today and sharing your knowledge. And you know, you're just, you've been really great. I do want to shout out to Rebecca. She has made a library out of library miracle, I will say, at Robert Eagle Staff, getting books into kids' hands in the middle of a pandemic. And I mean, I'm pretty sure our drive-through is busier than McDonald's at this point with the books. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, you can pop them into the chat or pop on to the mic. And please stay for the, I believe you go back into the Zoom for the lunch hour show. There's a play that is going to be performed, and we invite you all to come and partake of that, because gosh, we haven't been able to see plays for a while, so this is a good opportunity. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Reach out.